I like to walk around when I give presentations. Can everybody hear me? Fantastic. I'm going to try to project this. Good morning. Third on a series of presentations. Thank you both to the previous presenters. So I'm an engineer. Kind of exciting. And I'm going to talk about now the implementations, or more specifically some of the challenges buzzsaw maybe to implementing some of these nature-based solutions into the ground. And I'm going to, when we were thinking about this context of the presentation, I'm going to do this through the lens of an existing nature-based solution project we're doing here in Charleston, called the Barberry Woods project. So, one recognized in the city of Charleston, but one obviously owner and partner, and Biohabitats is one of our partners for this project as well. And thank you guys for Nature Conservancy for allowing us to discuss. So, again, Marc Horstman, state county engineers. This is going to be a little heavy on the engineering side, right? But kind of talking about the journey of us implementing some of these solutions here. And again, here's my contact information. So you're welcome to take a picture of this if you wanted to discuss in-depth engineering stuff where people won't fall asleep. Happy to do that. Right, quick. So just kind of a context. Barberry Woods project is located on Johns Island near the intersection of River Road and Maybank Highway. The focus of that project is helping to assist the Barberry Woods neighborhood, right? Hence the name, which is a residential neighborhood that has one ingress and egress. Hickory Knoll Way, I'll refer to that road quite a bit. That is the one-way in and one-way out. During flooding and storm events, they have a higher tendency to get flooded out. Well, you can imagine on a one-way in, one-way out, when that road gets flooded, it's impossible, it's impassable for people to get in and out, or more importantly, emergency vehicles, right, to come in and help people in times of emergencies. So the intent of this project, or one of the major driving intents, is to help resolve flooding in the Barberry Woods neighborhood. And so this is a drone shot, the Barberry Woods neighborhood, and it is a pointer here. Right, it is located right through here. I really like this drone shot. It shows a couple of things. So one is Johns Island. So if you're familiar with Johns Island, you can drive by every day and you'll see new housing developments going up. Okay, that's great. We have more housing, more development, right? More people moving to the area. And so finding a spot on Johns Island, you'll notice a nice open, green, open forested area here, finding a spot that we can help implement stormwater solutions to help resolve flooding on at Barberry Woods. I want everybody to just remember this picture here, right? Isn't it great we have a spot where there's no development? And I'm not going to talk, I'll talk about the background of Barberry. I'm not going to spend too much time because I want to make sure we have the implementations, but the big picture is that we were developing a concept plan where we take the flow that was coming to the Barberry Woods neighborhood, right down here, and then reroute it around in this big open space and have it drain that. So kind of bypassing the flow and helping reduce flooding on Hickory Knoll Way. And to weave into that solution, we want to slow the water, store the water, and slowly convey the water across that landscape using nature-based solutions. And everybody knew that. Slowing the water, storing the water, that all sounds very familiar with the themes of what we're trying to implement. Again, the whole design for this project will blend in these multi-layer benefits, talk about flood reduction, try to pull in funding where applicable, implement green infrastructure, provide environmental education, and enhance community connectivity. All of the great stuff to incorporate into the planning component of it. Quick. Okay, so we've talked now a lot about these initial concepts, initial ideas, and the idea is take the initial concept, you give it straight to the engineer, and then makes final design out of it, and you're good to go. Well, unfortunately, you have the initial concept, and kind of like how a stream meanders, and you have different meandering bends in the stream with forces pulling on this way and that way with the stream. projects, right, tend to weave in and out that way. There's different constraints that ultimately ebb and flow with the context of the project and how we implement those. And talking about the actual implementation of the projects, here are some things that ebb and flow in this project in particular. We want to make sure that we hit the City of Charleston stormwater design criteria, that we hit the actual hard engineering numbers, right, to assess risk and to make sure that we're not flooding people upstream and downstream. That all has an impact in the nature-based design. Any funding restrictions and requirements, right? There's no such thing as free money. Well, if there is, please let me know. Property acquisition. This is a key one as we're looking at space. And space around here is expensive, right? How do we utilize that space to implement these projects? I was going to show a picture of a buzzsaw instead of a checklist for permitting. No, I'm just kidding. It's permitting. Permitting is very important to help us making sure that we are collectively working with different agencies to put in a project that hits everybody's current checklist, or identifying where these checklists could be updated as we implement these projects. I know there's a lot of, I'm permitting folks in here, so I'm off the line. And also keep in mind the ecological engineering designs and making sure that our nature-based solutions work, it doesn't have any adverse impacts. Right? Some nature-based solution designs could have adverse impacts to the surrounding community. We'll make sure that we're not doing that. So let's go along that path here. This thing's flipping. So big picture for Barberry, and this is 3 years ago we came up with this concept plan on, hey, we could utilize all this space to blend in this braided stream channel wetland system that would help redirect the flow around. And it's just a very, very high-level plan, really implemented that circular components I talked about for that multi-layer benefits. And with our team partners for biohabitats to really come up with some great visual aesthetics on how we would blend in that solution within the surrounding landscape. This is what we would call the concept plan. And really kind of the focus of that concept plan was to lean heavy into a lot of nature-based design solutions, utilizing root wads, natural habitat features, wetland features, and promoting that, slowing the water, infiltrating it in, and blending that in. And this project is, in my hope, as the design engineer, is going to be the one of the projects that the city's going to hold up and say, yes, we can definitely incorporate nature-based solutions into our infrastructure, high-level infrastructure designs. So, on our first parameter, first meander of the stream here is, we want to make sure that we are hitting all about the intent of this project, right? Reducing the stormwater flow. That's at the end of the day, that's what we're spending our money for doing. And the goal is we're going to use the City of Charleston recent January 2020 stormwater design manual. It's a lovely manual. If you get a chance to read it, please do. And also, more importantly, at the end of the day, reduce the flooding on Hickory No Way, right? At the end of the day, we're protecting public health and safety. So that's our design parameters. For those who have not memorized the Charleston Design Manual, just as a reminder, the new manual does include a 10% increase in rainfall depth, right? So there is, compared to the previous designs pre-2020, there is a lot more water in our mathematical models that we're adding to systems. A lot more water we have to consider and move. I think somebody mentioned risk, the risk of trying to account for more risk within upcoming storms, and that's, that manual is a great job doing that. Or asking designers to do that. On the tail end, the tailwater, we're also implementing a 5.5-foot tailwater condition to account for sewer rise. So, just take a step back on this flat project. We're adding more water in, we're raising the water on the tail end. So there's a lot of water we got to deal And in addition to more water coming into the project, we're also, right, and our job is to protect public health and safety, is design a project where we're not increasing flooding downstream. Right? Think about when you resolve flooding, one of the cool things to do is, hey, we're just going to upsize the pipe. That resolves flooding here, but then people downstream, they get the tail end of that. They get flooded out. So the manual does address it. Hey, make sure your design does not increase water source elevations downstream or upstream that you're not flooding. I understand people can't read this, right? My intent is not for people to read every letter and number here. My hope is that you'll see the bottom number and it's either a 0 or a negative number. So our design, at different points along the project, we had to look at water source elevations for these different storm events, and we have neither increased or we reduced water source elevations upstream and downstream project. Right, so that was design constraint. How do we do this? We did utilize a 2D PC swim model, so that really incorporated a lot of the hydrology and hydraulics components of it. The Barberry Woods project is located here. Yet we wanted to utilize this whole surrounding area so we really understood what's going on upstream and downstream components of it. So this is showing existing conditions, flood depths. If you notice a slight change in that small tiny area, there's the Barberry Woods project. That's the proposed conditions. My point with these slides is that we had to look at a more holistic project approach than just one individual area. Right? Understand how the water flows through the whole system and how we're impacted by the system. And again, our goal was to reduce flooding on Hickory Knoll Way. So you get a bunch of numbers up here. Luckily, it's negative. We are reducing water source elevations on Hickory Knoll Way. And I'm an engineer, so I love tables and numbers, but I realize that most people see data through graphs. So from a graph perspective, the blue line is, hey, what currently floods. Our project, proposed project, is going to significantly reduce the, it's not going to completely solve it, by the way, but going to significantly reduce the amount of flooding. More importantly, the depth and duration. So currently, Hickory Knoll Way floods for over 12 hours during a 10% annual chance event, and we're reducing that down. We're reducing it down by 12 hours from what is currently flooding. So significant progress in allowing more opportunities for emergency vehicles to come in sooner. I'm going to quickly touch on funding. Right? Again, no such thing as free money. This project is, I confirmed this yesterday, man, if I'm wrong on this, you just tell me I'm wrong. The current funding sources, of course, city funds are paying for the majority of it. There is a ARPA funding, about $4.6 million. We did get some funds from South Carolina Conservation Bank, and I think the city is potentially looking at a revolving, school revolving fund. Great, funding. We're talking about implementation here, though, right? So what is, what's the major implementation for the ARPA funding that we're getting? If you don't know, schedule. Right? Those funds, and I'm not going to talk legally, essentially, they have to be utilized through construction by the end of 2026. That's fine, it's 2023, right? We got plenty of time. That's a fairly tight deadline. So for us to, that is another design constraint, tugging and pulling at our project. We got to make sure we get this thing finished with construction by the end of 2026. The South Carolina Conservation Bank also provides money, but they're using that money for conservation purposes, so they're using that money to help us get property for conservation. So that money can only be used for property acquisition, not necessarily construction costs. I'm going to hit just high level, so people get an idea of the overall scale. And again, these numbers are, say I'm being an engineer, right? These numbers are just estimates. We had a strategic retreat plan where we looked at saying, well, instead of doing this nature-based solution stuff, what if we just upsize the pipe along the entire corridor and just address flooding that way? That was about $19 million, plus or minus. Our full concept plan that I showed before at the beginning of the presentation, that full-scale nature-based solution. That was around the realm of the 16.8 million. As we, did the stream meander and updated our plan to 60%, that number dropped about 8.7 million. Then we go down to 90%. This is a reason that's dropping about 7.6. So I'm just saying that's the idea of just kind of the size and scale of this project. In our concept plan, and this was our property acquisition approach, and you can see all of the property that we were planning to get for that large-scale concept plan. That makes me excited, right? Because for every one of these properties, and one thing I'm going to recommend, we talk about implementations, if you're working on property, please get a title search, right? Make sure that you do the due diligence on who owns the property and why. So we always do title searches now. And when we did title searches on all these properties, this slide came up. Right? This came back from the title search. And I'm not a real estate attorney, right? It took me a hot minute to read through this several times for my little brain to figure out what that meant. It's Ayers property, right? There is a reason that whole stretch of land has not been developed yet. Huh, oh, look at that. So that's just an additional legal process that we had to go through as a team to help acquire property. Part of that agreement was to retain roadside frontage on that property. So where we were going to have, potentially have a nice wetland, now we have to now reserve that for, as part of the agreement. So again, things that help adjust the design property acquisition component of it. Ultimately, so I showed the slide of all of the properties. We did narrow that down and reduce our design to only, there's a total of 6 properties that then we now have to work with to either acquire by fee simple, one through South Carolina Conservation Base, part of that fee simple, and then others is getting easements. Now, one of the easements we had to get, right, was of course for the Barberry HOA property too, like the neighborhood that we're helping to protect. And I gotta say, I think that was probably the hardest easement to get. That's a decision by committee there on the HOA component. But we got it. So you asked me to talk about challenges to implementation. For a project of this size and scale, right, here's the list of permits that we have to obtain and the list of agencies that we need to work with. I'm going to tell a little side story, okay, and this is my own personal experience. Way back when I used to review models for FEMA, I used to have a checklist I would follow. And one time I was reviewing, and they followed the checklist to the T. And I went back to my boss on the first middle, I said, they're good to go. You know what my boss said? He said, no, you have to make a comment. No, they followed the checklist. He goes, no, we're getting paid to make comments. Okay. That was not the right thing that person should have said, right? But we're all human, right? If somebody's going to ask me to review something, I'm going to feel entitled to review it and to make sure that it's following a checklist that I have. If something's not on that checklist or deviates from that checklist, because maybe that checklist is not really incorporating some of this newer nature-based solutions design criteria, that's going to start a series of conversations that we all have to navigate. And so the reason I bring that up is through this permitting process, a lot of the checklists that a lot of these agencies that we are working with, we don't really have it really expanded to implement a lot of nature-based solutions. So if we're looking for things, challenges to implementation, let's look at these checklists and let's expand them. And let's provide the training for all of these review agencies. And I used to work for review agencies, and I'll tell you right now, my colleagues who work for those review agencies are not paid enough, and they're overworked, and there's not enough training. So, hey, let's fix that. That's going to help us obtain all these, work through all these permits as we implement some of these new technologies. A case example, we are working with the Army Corps of Engineers. You ever worked with the Army Corps? Yeah. And we are having to do an individual permit for this project. Well, the way the checklist is set up, even though we are putting in new wetlands, even though we're adding in more streaming, we have to pay wetland mitigation credits because we're disturbing the existing wetlands too to pay the new wetlands. That's just the way the checklist is written. Individual permit process, we're in the process to negotiate and kind of discuss how we can kind of help work through this. But on the first pass, if you follow the checklist for the submittal, that's a little ironic, right? We got to pay wetland mitigation. But again, that's just highlighting, talking about implementation, challenges of implementation. That's one I think we can really kind of together as a community work on to help expand. One other key component, I talked about the ecological engineering component of it. I'm all for infiltration-based practices, right? But think about it. We're going to take all this water, we're going to infiltrate it into the ground in areas that already have high water table. I don't see any issues with that whatsoever. So as for this project in particular, in addition to doing a two-dimensional surface water model, we also did a two-dimensional groundwater model. So we understand how the water, that interplay between surface and subsurface is happening. So we know from impacting the adjacent properties. We know from impacting adjacent wetlands, right? And I get to play with more models, right? And I tell my wife, I do a lot of modeling. And so this 2D model covered a wide area so we can make sure that we understand the impacts of it. On the left, and what's on the left-hand side is the existing conditions, groundwater, how it all flows to through the site. And if we really look like looking at contour lines, the right-hand model is the contour difference between the existing and proposed surface. It's a lot. My point being is that we are trying to look at the impacts of our project and how it's impacting the potential groundwater. How that's important, and again, I'm not saying you're going to read this out loud, but we did look at 82 land parcels that our project could potentially impact. And we're showing that our project is, the groundwater is not going to impact, it's only going to actually impact one parcel, and it's going to impact the corner of the parcel where there's no residential structure. So maybe there's a little bit more groundwater there. But that's something that we have in the back of our file saying, hey, us digging in the dirt and digging in the groundwater and pushing more water and infiltrating is not going to impact these adjacent property owners. We also looked at the impacts to adjacent wetlands. Obviously, wetlands are wet, and you dig close to them, and that changes how wet they are, how often they are, how often wet they can be in the soil. So we looked at that in detail. That helped guide our design on the wetland system that we're designing. So this I'm an engineer, I have to show a profile at least once in presentations. Right. And so that is showing that we are putting some of these wetlands at different elevations to be conscious how much water we're storing within them and make sure they have connection to the water table. So I had 20 minutes. Hopefully I'm trying to stay within that. But again, just talking about through the lens of Barberry Woods, some of the challenges and implementations we have for nature-based solutions and how a design itself can meander back and forth as we blend in all of these constraints. So I told everybody, hey, here's that concept plan of what it looked like after we went through that meander pattern. Here's what our plan looks like now, right? To help hit all the constraints. Am I looking time?
Great.
I'm great on time. Okay, I talk a lot, so I was trying to so I can open up to questions, or we can wait.
Yeah, we can take a couple.
Okay.